Hello everyone. Welcome to Earth Central, the podcast of Orbify, where we invite sustainability experts to discuss about sustainability matters. Today we have Matthew from Arivu to talk about EUDR and also about his life, his career, and also what he does in Arivu. So Matthew, the floor is yours.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Konstantinos. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. My name is Matthew Nelson. I have been most of my career in financial services, consulting, risk advisory, and a few years in banking and capital markets and investment management. So a lot of time spent in highly regulated space. And we have, in the recent years, been focusing more on innovation. And with our current project called arivu, we're focused on helping businesses to prove that they are compliant with regulations for their products. We've started with an EUDR focus, and we're going to talk some more about some of the recent developments there. But we are a compliance automation platform, bringing some very innovative and exciting capabilities to help businesses with sharing information about their compliance.
And can you tell me a bit further about your mission and vision?
Absolutely. So first of all, arivu is the Tamil word for the methodical acquisition of knowledge, which we felt was a really apt way of describing the capabilities that we are bringing to the table. We had started out in creating a cloud-based platform for ESG reporting and for helping business to manage some of the non-financial disclosures in sustainability. But when the EU Deforestation Regulations came out in the summer of 2023, we really felt that was a turning point for us. It was a real opportunity to focus on a set of business challenges which are regulatorily compliant, and of course they still are, even despite the recently announced delay of 1 year. But it was so important for us to be able to apply our tools and capabilities in our platform to some very specific business challenges that these regulations highlighted. And so it was a natural focus for us to pivot and shift toward product level compliance for the deforestation regulations. And it's such an important area when you step back and think about the broader sustainability initiatives and trends in the marketplace and just the importance of sustainability and circular economy. When you look from an environmental perspective and looking at deforestation, and it's a great place for us to be focused with our capabilities, because the impact is very direct and measurable, and so that has also been part of our strategic decision making to be focused on the deforestation.
This is very interesting also, and one of the things that we like to do in Orbify is, as you said, to have people around us that actually have a direct impact to the environment, to the planet. And what you do also has an impact, and this is very, very, very important for all of us, because we all work in climate tech, and part of climate tech is actually climate, and we should not forget that, which is very, very crucial. And you talked about the UDR, and this is the point we're going to dive into even deeper, because it's a topic that both of us are very interested in, and both of the companies we work on is very focused on UDR. So I would like, before I go deeper, to start with, can you tell me how you feel about the UDR? What is your overall thoughts, impressions about this regulation?
Yeah, it's really interesting to step back and look at the European Union and the range of legislation that they're putting forward in an effort to shift behaviors and to impact the environment and the overall kind of sustainability that businesses and communities have, particularly in Europe, and in an effort to reduce the deforestation impact of European consumers. This regulation has been put forward, and I think the letter of the regulation is it is very it is clear the implications and the implementation requirements of it. Of course, there's a lot of interpretation and challenges that are rising from that. But the importance of it cannot be understated. And so it's an excellent initiative, and yet there are enormous challenges to the implementation of it. And it is fascinating to look at some of the use cases that are put forward by industry associations and by countries outside of the EU, looking at very specific impacts on agricultural communities, on organizations, and particularly the smallholder farmers. I think this has been one of the greatest concerns throughout all of the dialogue about the EUDR, is the burden of proof that is being placed on smallholder farmers versus their ability to actually comply with the proof that they need to make visible, make available to the buyers of their product. Well, that's where the impact is. But what's interesting as well about EUDR is the local law compliance requirements, so the legality of production. And even though those legality of production points also exist in other industry standards and product certifications, from fair trade to PEFC and FSC compliance, and a range of others, require that the production be done in accordance with local laws. And so, although it is not new in principle, what the EUDR implies is that all production that is coming into Europe, not just certified production, but all production, has to have verifiable and conclusive evidence of its compliance. And as I mentioned, burden of proof. And of course, the operators and traders who are importing product into European markets, it is their burden of proof because they must comply with the regulations. But there is then a knock-on effect, and an extension of that burden of proof is the collection of information for their due diligence and their risk assessments from each of the parties in the chain of custody for the product. And so you have a significant new workload that's placed on European operators to collect that due diligence, do their own risk assessments, and arrive at a negligible or zero risk of non-compliance for the imported product. A large part of that due diligence is looking at the legality of production and the deforestation risk of the geolocation where the farmers and foresters have harvested the product.
So that was very interesting. Thank you so much for this analysis. It was perfect. And I cannot wait to go even deeper in these subjects because I think it's very important. And I would like also to stay in one point that you mentioned. We talked about products and everything that goes inside the EU. It has to be coming from deforestation-free land, and the operators traders have to make sure that this deforestation-free land. And based on EU, it has certain commodities. How do you feel about these commodities? Do you think something more should be included there, or these commodities are enough?
Yeah, it's a very good starting point. And of course, there's been significant research over decades that has led to the conclusion that these are the most appropriate or the most impactful commodities to include in the regulation right now. And of course, the European Commission has left it open to future expansion, both in terms of the range of harmonized system code products from these commodities, as well as other commodities as well. So will there be change? I think it's inevitable that greater scrutiny will be applied to other commodities as well. I was reading the other day about cotton production, and cotton production in Brazil alone is also a deforestation commodity. But let's park that for a moment, because I think what's really important is that we producers and suppliers in these supply chains come to terms with the regulatory obligations that we have to comply with deforestation regulations. And this goes well beyond just the EUDR, because this is just one of many different deforestation regulations that are in place and are planned globally. And so, and I think it's along those lines that we come back to, of course, there will be an extension of the commodities and products that will be covered. But it is really important that we come to terms with what it means to be compliant and how we go about meeting these regulations. And one thing that we have learned from years in the financial services regulation or other highly regulated sectors is that businesses will do the bare minimum to meet the regulation requirements. And so that is a cat and mouse game played between regulators and business, and has been for decades. It will continue. Okay, so now let's look at the minimum requirements for meeting the EU deforestation regulations. And I think it's also important to remember that no one is going to be perfect straight out of the gates. It will be the smallest of fractions of players or stakeholders who will have all of their ducks in a row for that for full compliance. So we're now in a situation where we need to have, meaning all operators and intermediaries and producers of commodity, need to have in place the governance and the controls and the visible proof of our compliance so that we have a defensible position under scrutiny. That's where we start. And so when you look at the letter of the law, there are of course information sets that must be made available. One of the most important things here, and I find this fascinating about the EUDR, and this is also one of the reasons why at arivu we have focused on this regulation. And it's because the regulations are product level. They're not about entities. They're not about the entities in the supply chain. They are about the product. And so that creates a unique lens through which you must look at all of the compliance evidence that needs to be assembled for those risk assessments. Secondly, it is the requirement to share information among these within a chain of custody, but really to share information from producers and intermediaries outside the European Union with those operators and traders who must comply in the Union. Now, a lot of this information is commercially sensitive. From whom did I buy my ingredients? How much and when? And to whom did I sell my resulting product? And how much and when? So there's commercially sensitive information that is meant to be shared because those operators must see it in order to do their due diligence and run their risk assessments. This is new. Under product certification standards, that information has been inside the entity assembled and made visible to certification bodies who come in and audit according to the standards. Have you done what you need to comply with these standards? If yes, fine, you get your certification. And it is that certification which is shared. And so that fundamental difference in product level analysis, which actually, by the way, that product level does exist with FSC and PEFC and other product certifications, but the sharing does not. And so I find that a really important thing to remember, and of course this is why we're bringing some novel capabilities to the table to help with this permissioned sharing of sensitive information to a set of stakeholders, and that visibility must remain for 5 years. So the due diligence that was carried out on the shipment of product when the due diligence statement was filed, all of that evidence must be kept for 5 years. So some really fascinating dynamics and implications of this regulation which make it a fascinating but a very challenging business requirement set to address.
One of the main characteristics of EUDR is also about data sharing, as you mentioned, like super important. And now I'm thinking, let's say there are some companies or organizations that they're already compliant. They've already been through this process. Of course, this is impactful in a good way because of deforestation. That's the positive side of this regulation. And then I'm thinking, since yesterday that we've seen this news about the delay, that European Union proposed a delay of 1 year for the UDR and for 2 years for the small businesses. However, it was already a year after for small businesses, so it's like 1 year for everyone. And I'm just trying to find out here how this organization who already compliant will feel with this delay, how it's going to impact them. And also would like to know what is your thoughts about this delay? Were you expecting that? We even seen China and the States really pushing a lot for the UDR to be delayed. So I'm just thinking, what's your overall view about that?
Yeah, it's a challenging situation. So let's start with the expectations about the delay. It's been really interesting to. We've been very close to this regulation for over a year now, and it has been very interesting to watch the pace and intensity of pushback increase over the past kind of 6 months versus what we saw in the latter part of 2023.
Right.
And also it's been interesting to see those early adopters or early movers who have been seeking solutions and investing time and effort in EUDR readiness, how their focus has shifted over time as well. And so, I mean, first of all, things like one of the most visible and also one of the most challenging aspects of EUDR is the satellite analytics of the geolocations where the products have been produced. And of course, this is where Orbify excels with your capabilities. And so early on, that was the focus of the conversations, of many conversations, and the search for solutions was focused in that Earth observation technologies and exactly how do we go about running the analysis and collecting the geolocations and polygons. And it feels like from what we're seeing in the market, there has been recently more of a shift into, well, okay, how actually can we get ourselves ready? Because the European Commission kept standing their ground, and they were not backing down in the face of pretty significant global pushback and industry association pushback, etc. So in recent months, we've seen far more, I guess, kind of a ramp up, or at least a more visible evidence of DIY activities. We're just going to do our best. You hear terms like we're just going to muddle through with the rest of our colleagues. Others have been waiting for guidance, of course, from the European Commission, which has been very slow, and unfortunately, it could have been managed better by the European Commission. But that guidance
now,
has
yesterday, they published a very nice document. I don't know if you've been through that, and the request questions they had it's very detailed. But I do believe what you also said, that should have been published months before, not just now. Yeah,
no, that's right. And I do believe that will be extremely helpful for all involved to have that greater clarity. So to come back to your question, did we expect it? It's always been a threat, and it's always been discussed in industry fora, and it's always been a possibility. I guess personally, it's unfortunate that it has happened because, of course, we have a solution to this problem, and so the urgency for compliance for a innovative tech firm like your business and mine, it's unfortunate to have that pressure taken off. But let's come back to the other part of your question, which is how does one feel when one has invested in preparation, and what does it all mean, this delay? So those organizations which have invested time and money in their preparation, all they've done is future-proofed themselves for what is an inevitability. So um, even without EUDR, there's a growing array of regulations on supply chain due diligence, on track and trace of food and products, even on product level passports, on non-financial disclosures in supply chains, and then non-financial disclosures at product level. So carbon footprinting at product level. The investments that have been made toward meeting EUDR are not wasted in any sense. And let's come back to this because there is a real close crossover between the Germany's Lieferkettensicherheitsgesetz, the German supply chain law, and the CSDDD and EUDR. We can come back to that one. But the investment will not be wasted, has not been wasted, and so they are simply in a better position to meet these challenges as we go forth. Whether those challenges are regulatory driven or market and commercially driven, and I say that because let's not forget the focus of consumers on really wanting to know where their products, their food is coming from, and to ensure that their purchase of those products is not contributing to deforestation and environmental decline, and also that it is contributing to indigenous community support and social impact at a local level around the world. That has not gone away. That impetus and focus by consumers around the world has not been delayed. So I think that's something that we must keep in mind to keep this particular regulation in the context of broader trends towards sustainability, circular economy, and just acting with more responsibility as human beings.
This is such a great point, actually. It's something that we're discussing internally with Orbify also. It's not just about, a delay, because of course it's a delay. Both of us work with the EUDR, we provide the solution. So nobody was that happy when we seen that, which is still not confirmed also. Let's say that also is it's about to be approved. But as you mentioned, it's something so important in so many different aspects. This regulation, it's going to future-proof companies, and also it's not going to go away. So if they did it earlier, it means they're going to be leaders on sustainability. They can communicate that, and then they don't also have to rush, as it happened this year during the last months of next year. I would like to go a bit back, and can you tell me how these three laws, like EUDR, the one from German supply chain, can you tell me a bit how they're aligned?
Take, for example, CSDDD. So this is the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Regulation. Some of the key requirements under that are the need to carry out due diligence on various parties in your extended supply chains, also to ensure the legality of their operations. And so we're looking at everything from complying with environmental legislation, with human rights laws, labor laws, taxes and taxation. So the requirements for extended supply chain analysis, due diligence, and compliance under CSDDD is actually very closely related to EUDR. And so once again, the investments placed into EUDR compliance are going to be helping with CSDDD.
For all of them.
That's exactly right.
I would like to go back to EUDR to have this conversation a bit further. And I would like to know from your side, what do you think is going to be the change on supply chain when it comes to European Union? How do you think this regulation is going to impact the supply chain, if it's going to disrupt it in any way? And also would like to know how you think of the pricing of imported goods inside the EU is going to actually be changed throughout this time.
Yeah. So no, this really does speak to some of the unintended consequences of the EUDR. And so without question, we're already seeing significant supply chain disruptions and shifts in supply chain toward those providers and supply chains where there is greater transparency. Take, for example, Ethiopian coffee production. And there's been a significant drop in European purchases from Ethiopia simply because of lack of information at the producer level about deforestation and the mixing of known origin and unknown origin products in that supply chain. So yes, significant supply chain disruption. You mentioned as well price differentials.
Right.
Now, one of the things that we're seeing in the pulp and paper space is an expectation that a supplier outside the European Union who can put forward evidence of compliance in their own supply chain is going to be in high demand, right? Anyone who's not able to demonstrate compliance and the transparency in their supply chains, they're going to struggle to sell product into the European Union because there's just that much higher risk of non-compliance and discovery of that non-compliance by the competent authorities who are checking the shipments coming into Europe. Now, there are also some indications of unintended consequences in some of the case studies put forward. For example, Leather Producers Industry Association in Italy was fearing a shift in leather product production out of the EU because they would not be able to track and trace the leather from the cattle that they were actually using. And with the absence of that traceability, all of a sudden you're needing to shift your production outside of Europe to produce those leather goods outside of Europe and importing harmonized system code products that are not caught under EUDR. So that was a very interesting use case and concern by leather manufacturers in Italy. There's also, I've heard some concerns from the animal feed sector. Mm-hmm. So just to give you an idea, for many years, the European Union has had strict regulations on genetically modified soy versus non-GMO product. And so the track and trace of genetically modified product through extended supply chains and has been there a long time, as has the need to keep those products segregated from unknown origin soy product. But with EUDR comes even further burden of proof and further cost. And these costs have to be borne by someone, and it's going to be by the European importers and eventually the European consumers. So now you start looking at the price of chickens. And so the price of a chicken in your supermarket, one fed in Europe on EUDR compliant feed, which often includes soy and even palm and palm oil product, the feed costs are higher. Therefore, the price of that chicken is going to be higher than one fed from not necessarily compliant feed outside the EU, but the chicken shipped into EU for consumption. So there is a market dynamic and an unintended consequences that does have consequences for food producers and for entire supply chains.
Do you see any solution in that? How would you think that we can solve this issue?
It's a very good question, and I think how to solve it. I think there will be regulatory response to these situations, but there will also be market response to these situations. And so we will simply find, like with any regulation that comes into place, we will find changes in behaviors, changes in market dynamics, changes in supply and demand, and therefore prices. And these things will correct and settle over time. And new amendments or regulations will come into place and the markets will again adapt to these regulations. Yeah, and part of that adaptation, part of that adaptation, is going to be in the policing of the regulation as well, right? And so that's been one of the biggest points of conversation that we've had with industry participants over the past months, is speculating or anticipating to what extent will the competent authorities enforce the regulations, impose fines, at what level will they impose fines, how many of their product shipments will they actually hold in port until they settle examination of what's been happening, and holding product in port incurs its own costs. So I've heard of ports charging up to 1% of value of the shipment per day that it's held in port. And so that is a cost which, again, it's unknown. It's unknown, and it depends on the approach taken by the competent authorities to enforce these regulations. So once again, I guess I put that out there as a further example of the levers and mechanisms by which the impact of a regulation will be adjusted and over time.
Right. This is very good insight actually, and we don't discuss about it a lot. It's something that just stays kind of like in the back, but it's good to bring it up. And also, it kind of leads me into another question, because we know the penalties and the cost of EUDR not compliance, but I want to know a bit further and discuss a bit further with you what thing is gonna be as a cost apart from the fines, apart from the penalties.
Yeah. And I think this comes back to the point of companies that have invested in compliance, they're future-proofing their business.
Yeah.
And part of that is they have a better ability to tell a story to their consumers, to their customers, a story about their product and where that product has come from and how certain they are of its origins and how it was treated en route to the consumer, and how people have been treated in the supply chain that have handled that product. I mean, these are once again, they're very important points from a marketing and a product positioning perspective, in front of consumers who are increasingly really care about these impacts. And
Yeah.
and so through compliance with EUDR, and let's just restate what that means. Compliance with the EUDR requires the assembly of evidence, of certain compliance evidence from different parties and an entire chain of custody, and a number of different compliance proof points from the farmers and foresters at the far end. And that data can tell very powerful and compelling stories to consumers. That can be turned into a marketing advantage for consumers in Europe and elsewhere. This is not just for European consumers.
So yeah.
When you've got that capability and that data collection, you also have other opportunities. You not only have an opportunity to enhance the marketing story to your customer, but you have an opportunity to further analysis, the calculation of a carbon footprint through the life cycle of that product. So actually filling out life cycle analysis for the products in the different stages of the supply chain. But you've also got an opportunity to talk about the impact of that product on local communities, especially local communities in the areas of production, because of all of those proof points that the regulations require from the farmers and foresters, which
That's
come
a great
back to
point.
a challenge to get hands on. But and again, that's where Orbify and Arivu add so much value in digitizing and simplifying the assembly of that evidence for the benefit of the farmers and foresters. So we have an opportunity to use that information to share impact stories and by providing a technology to engage with those local communities, we also have an opportunity to feed information and value back to those parties, back to those local farmers, the smallholder farmers, whether that be we've got satellite analytics on your property for these years. By the way, there's regenerative agricultural practices based on what we're seeing. Look at these, and feeding that into NGOs and local community organizations or local cooperatives to equip them to enhance the regenerative agriculture and sustainability capabilities of their community of producers. Right? So in that sense, complying with EUDR has enormous opportunities to drive value to those communities. And so it's a win-win. This is one of those fascinating space where compliance with a very complex regulation actually can create win-win
results. Yeah, that's a very good point. And I would like to go a bit further to the satellite data that you referred to. Of course, also because Orbify, and of course also how you use them. And I would like to know, because we've seen that geospatial data is very important for UDR. It's something that is needed, something that it has to happen. And I would like to know, what do you think are going to be the challenges for smallholders, especially, to find and acquire this geospatial data?
Yeah, and this has been one of the biggest talking points and biggest challenges that's been discussed since long before EUDR even became law last year.
Right.
It is one of the biggest challenges because of a variety of reasons. Everything from the availability of technology, knowledge and education of what exactly is required to capture the required polygon or geolocation data in the first place. And then just simply how to do that when you're out of range of Wi-Fi or so just this myriad of challenges of how to do this. There are and you know your teams will be far familiar with this than myself, but so many different ways to ease this process, and free apps that have been created and downloadable using offline mobile phone technology. I won't go into them; those are your areas of expertise. But there are, and that's I think one of the positive side effects of the regulation is it has forced innovation. It has forced people to think about innovative new ways to acquire the right information and then to equip people the farmers to do the same. Now, there are also opportunities for government involvement and government agencies.
That's a great point.
So from everything from land management agencies or land title registries, farming and forest permits. There's opportunity for where the records are, where the data exists, then these parties can come to the table as a very important verifier of the validity of a farmer's claim. And then there's also the non-governmental organizations and the charities who have boots on the ground and engagement. They have also stepped up their collection of appropriate geolocation data, again, to support these communities. And then you come into the challenge of getting these parties to talk to each other and to speak the same language and to share data in a common method, a common structure. So now we get into the data integration challenges that arise out of disparate data sets and different standards. I mean, I was surprised to learn about the different geolocation standards that are being used. And so all of these are challenges to assemble and utilize and standardize this information. But it's encouraging to see the range of different parties that have come together to try and solve them.
I mean, when it comes to Orbify, we're always here to help small stakeholders to find the geospatial data with any way that we can try. With our team, we're always here to help them, and this should be there, and people should be actually have this access, and we can try to help them as much as we can in that.
Konstantinos, just to build on what you were saying about Orbify, one of the things that I was so impressed about with the data sets, it's the richness of the API endpoints that Orbify makes available. Literally being able to see things, everything from precipitation levels and soil quality, a range of different soil quality analytics that are available, flood risk and drought risk, and of course all of the measurable gases. And then there's the biomass metrics as well. So there's such a rich set of endpoints that Orbify provides. And when you think about all the different ways that they can be used when you start monitoring change over time, and you look at material changes in some of those data points, and of course then agronomists and scientists have all kinds of uses, and they're specialists in best to use that and how best to translate those data points into advice and value for landowners and farmers, so sharecroppers on property. So it's just it's almost shortchanging yourself to talk about just Earth observation or satellite analytics. Let's talk about the detail, because there's some rich data sets in there, in addition to the deforestation analysis that you're able to extract over time.
Thank you so much for telling about that, because it's something I think you described it even better than I would describe it. So that's very nice, and it's very nice to hear that words from you also. Yes, if I would try to do that as much as we can, we have like a lot of components. We develop more and more every time, and we try to have as many data sets as we can. And all of them are also according to you when it comes to EUDR. So we're very, very careful about our data sets and the accuracy of them. But then I would like to, to drop it back to you and ask you, what do you do in your company when it comes to EUDR? How you face these challenges? What is your solution? Why your solution is important to face these challenges?
So thank you for that question. At arivu, what we're doing is we're helping businesses to prove that their products meet the EU deforestation regulations. Now, in this sense, we are providing a compliance automation platform, and think of it is effectively a due diligence system. We provide a workplace where parties can come onto the platform, and you start with a high-level assessment of EUDR readiness. And by answering questions, depending on your role in EUDR, you're answering questions about your readiness, and it is based on both the letter and the spirit of these regulations. And where you have the evidence available and it's been audited or assured by a third party, you have a higher score. And where there are gaps, we immediately generate a risk and go through the remediation steps, so that at the end of this very quick process, your organization can see with a gap analysis how prepared you are for EUDR, and you literally end up with a statement of work for those points on which you need to focus your efforts to ensure that you're compliant. Then, for the product that we're talking about, the product that you're selling, which falls under EUDR, you look back and invite those from your bill of materials, those suppliers who have supplied relevant components to that product. So with that invitation, those parties carry out an EUDR readiness assessment, they get their readiness score, and they too turn to their suppliers. So you create a supply chain, and you're capturing risk maps and EUDR readiness scores and gap analyses at each stage of the chain of custody, all the way out to the farmer. And so that's the starting point for Arivu's EUDR solution. Now, for each of these topical areas, we enable upload of any data source and any proof of compliance with those points. Now, what we then do so in that sense, you're able, as any of those organizations is capturing their evidence of compliance. Now comes the question of how to deal with the sensitivity, the commercial sensitivity and the GDPR sensitivity of some of that evidence. And this is where our innovation comes in. And we are using digital identity protocols to enable to create verifiable compliance credentials. So these credentials are then permissioned access for sharing, but also they can be you're already demonstrating who has seen these credentials and done their assessment. It might be your financial accountant. It might be an industry certification body who has assessed your organization for certification. So anyone who has permission access to view your compliance credential can see who has audited already. And so it's the audit and governance and control history, as well as the change history of the assembly of that data. Who put that information in there? Who answered the questions? Who uploaded the evidence? What has changed over time? And these audit trails for those compliance credentials are captured immutably in distributed ledger technology so that they are viewable by anyone who has permission to view the audit history and the verification history of your compliance credential. So what's exciting to us is that this methodology and these innovations are applicable well beyond EUDR, but they're applicable for any compliance where you need to share sensitive information among people where you need to prove your compliance and enhance the trust that you are actually compliant and your product is actually compliant.
Also a challenge you referred to before, a challenge about privacy and data privacy from different companies or NGOs and other companies that they don't really want to share the data. And then you come into and you solve this issue very straightforward. And this is also one of the reasons why I really enjoy doing this podcast, me and the whole team of Orbify, because we get to know different innovations more and more. And then we see all this like field and industry of startups trying so hard to fix this, the world and the sustainability industry. And there's so many nice things out there. And it's so nice also to connect and, focus how to make everything better rather than just competing, because in Orbif, I also believe that having partners, it's actually what help us move forward more. It's a very important part of innovation and sustainability.
I completely agree with that. And this is such an important topic, and it is such a large space. Collaboration is required all around.
Exactly. I fully agree. And before I conclude this podcast, which actually I would like to keep it going on and on, but it's going to be a very long podcast after all, so I think I should start concluding it. I would like to, we have like a small tradition when it comes to this podcast. The last question is actually something that we ask the guests to say something inspiring, something that they inspired themselves or their company, and something that they would like to share with the audience. So what can you share out to your mind right now?
I think it has to come back to the meaning of the word arivu. And so when you think about arivu as the Tamil word for the methodical acquisition of knowledge, it's something that it applies to all of us and every person on the planet and every business. It is something to aspire toward, being methodical in our acquisition of knowledge and in our pursuit of solutions and insight, intelligence, and in our pursuit of sustainability. So be methodical and pursue without end.
It's very nice, and I'm definitely going to be inspired by that. I hope the audience also, and I'm sure actually we're going to be inspired also by that. I would like to, first of all, to thank you for being here and for joining us. It was very nice and have very nice insights, and I'm sure the audience also would really like them. And I would like to ask you, where can they find you?
Absolutely, no, thank you. And so Arivu is found at arivu.io. That's our website. I'm Matthew Nelson. My LinkedIn profile is rmatthewnelson, and we have a LinkedIn presence. I'm also the sponsor of a LinkedIn group called EUDR Readiness. And of course, that is it's a hive of information and activity, and really pleased to see the engagement on that site. But please reach out anytime. I'm happy to answer questions, to debate situations in the market, and talk about regulation or technology and data management. So I can be found at my email, matthew.nelson@arivu.io, and so, and my contact details are also available on LinkedIn.
Great. And also I have to really recommend the EUDR Readiness LinkedIn page. I think I get many updates there. We also post some stuff from Orbify there. It's a great page. A lot of engagement goes there. So well done for organizing that for all of us. It's very good. Of course, I'm also going to disclose your information in the description. So if anybody wants to reach out to you, they can also find this information in the description. And I would like to thank you so much for being here and for this great conversation we had.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.